Thank you so much for being with me this morning. I know that you had lots of places you could be, and I'm glad you're here this morning. If you'll notice, I hope you each got a handout as you walked in. I am a teacher at heart, so you never get to do anything with me without some work, just so you know. So on your handout, I have something that said I want you to write down memorable experiences you as a person had in school. What was a memorable experience for elementary, middle school, and high school? So you've got a little paper there, just jot down a couple little memories. While you're doing that, I'm going to tell you just a little bit about myself. I have been a teacher, I have been a gifted ed coordinator, I have been a special ed coordinator, I have been an administrator at all levels, and I've been a first-year Success College coordinator and professor. But one of the coolest things I did was 25 years ago, I started in Texas a nonprofit in our area for abused and neglected children. It's probably the thing that as a mom I'm proudest of because it really made my children, who I feel like are very privileged, understand that there's not everybody doesn't have the life that they do. Though sometimes they might say that they're abused, but in my defense, wooden spoons were real when my kids were little and it was fine. One of the things we talk about with trauma when we start talking about those pieces is creating a pro-social learning ecosystem. On your little sheet today, one of the things I have is some little check-ins for you. If you'll notice, you've got some QR codes. Those are Mentimeters. On those Mentimeters, when you click on it, it doesn't store any information. If you want to share that with your district, if they don't know about it, it's free, it's awesome. But I just want to know how you're feeling today in your role. I got a chance to visit with quite a few of you yesterday, and one of the things I know is everybody's experiencing some type of trauma. And we know that trauma can change life in an instant, and the changes linger on. How many of you were in charge of technology at your campus? Raise your hand. Or at your district. How many of y'all have some technology things at your district? Our technology budget at our district was 10 years long. Y'all know what I'm talking about? Like every year some schools get some more stuff. Every year other schools get some other stuff. What happened at COVID? Our 10-year technology budget became a 3-month technology budget. We did everything we could, and it changed us a little bit. We see that with any type of trauma. When we talk about that the trauma can change life in an instant and those changes linger on, they do so for kids and they do so for adults. How many of you are noticing at your campus people have shorter fuses? How many of you may recognize at your campus you might have a little shorter fuse? The changes linger on, and it's created what I call a crisis of confidence. Jimmy Carter talked in 1976 about the crisis of confidence, and what it really is a situation in which people no longer believe that a government system is working properly and will no longer work to support it. How many of you have seen people at board meetings that you have never seen in your life? We have a family, I swear they have 48 kids. I know they really don't, but you know, there's families that have a kid every other year. And as a principal, they never came to anything. We had parent conferences, they didn't come, and we never ever, knew really who they were. But when all the COVID and the mask mandates started, guess where they were? Every month. Y'all can tell me where? At the board meeting. And they're mad, and I'm like, first of all, we're all like, I've got an elbow dig from one of my friends going, they exist. They really exist. But they were up in arms. They were upset. What are schools? What are schools? Government agencies. And that's affected all of us. And it matters because it affects performance negatively, it increases response time, and it escalates distrust. I feel like one of my best roles as an administrator, one of the things I could do was pivot quickly, and I really can make some automatic decisions. How many of you feel like that in your role as a leader? When it comes to making a decision times, I can say, okay, let's do ABC. My response time has escalated. I used to send an email that would take me 10 minutes, push and send, and now I have to read it 10 times and send it to other people to read because I am worried that I'm going to say something incorrectly, and it's in a world that's different now. It will be screenshotted on social media. Distrust, and I want to tell y'all, this is my big aha for you today. Are y'all ready? So you can say you learned one thing from today. Distrust is an automatic response. Did you know that? How many of you, I kind of think I'm naturally trusting. I say I love to rely on the kindness of strangers. But distrust is what kept us from getting eaten by saber-toothed tigers. It's that little feeling in the back of your mind when you're walking that, okay, maybe there's somebody walking behind me. All of those things really do escalate distrust. But distrust is natural for us. Trust is not. One of my friends yesterday talked to me about transparency. And that's what everybody's wanting. And you're wanting it from a dealer, you're wanting it from a vendor here, but school parents are wanting it, aren't they? Teachers want transparency. That's the only way we can quit with the distrust. And one of the reasons we know that happens is because of survival brain. How many of you have heard of your amygdala? Okay? Your amygdala is actually what makes you not get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger when we were young. But that survival state down there is really our brainstem constantly saying, are we safe? When I ask you, and I'm going to call on you because I don't like talking on myself, tell me what we want kids to be able to do. Tom, I'm fixing to pick on you, so get ready. What do we want kids to do, Tom? What do we be able to do in schools? Learn. What else do we want them to be able to do? I'm picking on you. Think. Socialize. Make good decisions. Time management. If anybody has teenage kids, you know time management. But the way that we make all those things happen is in the executive state of our brain. And when we're in trauma mode, guess where we are? We are in our amygdala and we're triggered. And one of the things that we know is that it's really important, not just on our development, but our neurocognition. When you are in survival mode, you only understand about every third word spoken from you. You try hard to regulate yourself and you try hard to regulate your emotions. You sometimes have outbursts about the tiniest things, and at other times, just to get away from the stress and the anxiety in your head, you emotionally detach and become indifferent. And it's not just because you're a bad parent or a stupid person. When you're in survival mode, what you hear is about every third word. So when we're talking to our staff, when we're talking to our parents, when we're talking to our children and they're in survival mode, their language comprehension is not what it would be if they weren't. And our society really thinks all of our kids like that first row, don't they? They're excited to learn. They can't wait to be here. Well, guess what? Most of the kids we deal with are really in those bottom two pictures. They're getting themselves ready for school. They're parenting their parents in some cases. They are dealing with things that you and I might never dream of. And some of them are doing it well than some adults. I always said as a gifted coordinator, we are missing our gifted kids because they don't score well on tests. But I can tell you in life survival skills, they beat kids all over the way. They are problem solvers. I had a child in school who came to the office one day and he was late. And I said, he's with his little brother, and he said, why are you late, Levon? And he said, we had a flat tire. And his little brother, Nigel, goes, and so I said, Levon, you go out there and wait for me for a second. Nigel, he goes, I said, all right, why are you late, buddy? Y'all aren't in trouble, but why are you late? He said, the sun changed. I said, what do you mean the sun changed, buddy? What do you mean? He said, Ms. Walker, the sun changed. I thought about it. It was daylight savings time. Levon had gotten Nigel up when he saw the sun at a certain spot. He didn't account for the others. He was a third grader. I said, where's your mom, babe? Well, we don't know. She worked last night, but we didn't see her yet at home. Third grade and kindergarten. Our kids are dealing with this. When we talk about adverse childhood experiences, these are the things that kids go through. And whether we want to admit them or not, when we look at these things, many of you have gone through the same thing, or your children. I was doing a training at school the other day, and the principal, I did this slide, and I was talking about the effects of it, and the principal gets up and walks out, and I was like, well, I have ticked him off. Have y'all ever had those moments? Like, I didn't know what I said, but I'm sure I said something. And he said, I looked at your list, and I thought about my own children, and I saw what their trajectory would be if I don't work on it. And one of the things that we see, how common they are, is 64% of the U.S. population has at least one ACE. Now, I want you to listen to me on this next one. This is why this matters. 98% of the prison population has at least one ACE, and 46% of them have more than 4 ACEs. What we do right now in our schools matter for these kids. We cannot completely overcome their ACEs, but the interventions we do with them will make a difference. And it makes a difference for them as their life. If you look at your trauma pyramid, if a child has 6 or more ACEs, they die up to 20 years earlier than children that don't. You look at the social and cognitive development, the adaptation of the at-risk behaviors, and those stresses. I want you to look at Marguerite Johnson and what has happened to her. Marguerite was also someone that was, they say, she did not speak. She was selective mute till age 14. What do you think Margaret's trajectory is? I'm going to call on some of you, so just be ready. What do you think her trajectory is? Pretty low. Looking at what do you think? Early death. This is Marguerite Johnson. The difference in why Marguerite Johnson defeated the odds is because of connection. Now, I wore red shoes today. I did not know that the speaker was going to talk about connection in red shoes. It was a fluke, but I'm going to take it. But what we find out when we think about those things is a connection matters. The way that she became successful was she had a grandmother and her siblings that they clung tight to each other. But in schools, we notice that these impacts of trauma really fit into these 2 intertwining categories. They affect academic performance through reduced cognitive capacity, sleep disturbances. Y'all have seen that. If you've been to the campuses, you've seen the kids at the back of the hoodie down and asleep. That also difficulties with memory and language delays. It also impacts their social relationships. You have a hard time with kids with trauma when you back them into a corner and they don't have any choices. They come out either fighting or in the fetal position. We have attachment difficulties, poor peer relationships, and unstable living situations. And that's all pretty depressing, isn't it? But what do we do about it? Well, we know that ACEs can be overcome, but connections are really going to matter. And this is where you come in. This is the choices where you make a big difference. Because we've got to think about what kind of community we want to build. Through all my work with trauma, we have a CEU course with USC. And it has been such an eye-opening experience through that and also writing the book, Surviving the Storm. When you break it down to things, it's about being pro-social or antisocial. How many of you know what antisocial is? I'm going to give you how many of my introverts are in the room. It is not being introverted. You can be introverted and pro-social. But being antisocial is any act that intends to harm or negatively impact another individual. It's threats. It's simulating that threat response. It's living in that stress response in your amygdala. And it also lessens secure and cooperative relationships and promotes anxiety. How many of you have kids on your campus that you know suffer from anxiety? How many have teachers that suffer from anxiety and even some administrators as well? But pro-social is the opposite of that. It's any act that benefits another individual. It's sharing, donating. Now, I didn't make pro-social up or antisocial. Those are psychological concepts. But when we started looking at the research, it wasn't just us. So I want you to look at your experiences you wrote down on your page really quick. Which of those are pro-social and which of those are antisocial? If you have somebody close to you, kind of chat for a second and talk about that. I'm going to give you 2 minutes on your clock, but see if your experiences are pro-social or antisocial. Sometimes our experiences in school that we really remember aren't the best ones. Sometimes they can be both pro-social and antisocial. One of the things that I always use as an example is I was a freshman in high school, and my high school was two-story. So it had first story, then the little landing area, second story. And all the freshmen lockers were upstairs. All the senior boys' lockers were on the bottom of the stairs. This is why I have a little bit of locker PTSD, not going to lie. So I'm walking down the stairs. I'm going to tell you, I don't know, I may be aging myself, but do you remember jelly shoes? You know, jelly shoes are a little slick on the bottom. So I have on my jelly shoes, my cute little dress, and I am walking, I kind of feel like, hey, here I am, freshman. I get on the first stair, those steps, I get at the landing, I'm like, okay, this is great. I hit that first step with my jelly shoe. I flung my feet up and went pop, 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 way to the bottom in front of all of the senior boys there. I could have had a compound fracture, ladies and gentlemen, and I could have hopped up. I was like, oh, I'm fine. I'm good. My cousin was a senior. And I remember sitting at the bottom of that step, hopping up, and I mean, you talk about having a whopper of a bruise. I had one. And I wanted to cry. I wanted to run out of school, wanted to cry. Very first day, my cousin said, all right, guys, nothing to see here. And they're like, oh, yeah. And he's like, all right, hop up. And he looked at me, he goes, are you okay? He goes, yep. He goes, we'll go to class, act like it didn't happen. It was antisocial. If he hadn't been there, I can't imagine how embarrassed. I'd been the girl that fell down the school forever. But it was pro-social in the fact that he was kind and helping me out. Now, y'all may feel like he's a little tough because he didn't say, hey, honey, are you okay? Because he knew I would cry if he was nice to me. Any of y'all like that? He knew I would cry if he was nice to me. So I jumped up. But it was pro-social experience, and it made a change for me because I always felt like, and I didn't need it much more again, but he had my back if I needed it. We are also looking at the research, and it says the same thing. Pro-socialness has a strong positive impact on our academic achievement and social preferences. But early aggression had no significant effect on either outcome. How many of y'all have those kids that are wild and crazy when they're little? And you're like, oh goodness, I hope they don't grow up to be a serial killer. Those kids, well, we found that didn't matter as much as these pro-social behaviors could be learned, and it actually became a great variance in academic achievement and social preference. So what is pro-socialness? Well, pro-socialness really is these learning tasks. But what I'm going to say to you is it's really about being able to work together. I don't know how you feel. How many of you have some type of collaboration in your mission statement? Everybody raise their hand. You know you have it. Future-ready skills, whatever the word. But are we really having kids collaborate? Are we really having kids cooperate? Or are we just having kids sitting together in groups of 4? Pro-socialness really is about experiential learning tasks and having them use real-world situations. It's also about thoughtful interactions and behaviors. When you talk about these things here, what do your kids look like? Now, I'm going to say this right now, and if you're from Texas, I won't even need to explain, but if I step on your toes, pick up your feet. What do you see when you walk through your campuses? Do you see kids interacting with each other? Do you see kids sitting where they aren't talking at all? If we're going to mimic this behavior, if we're going to model this behavior, we have to have kids be able to use these behaviors in a safe space. And one of the things that we talk about, and we've researched each of these, and we talked about what does that need to look like in the environment, in the learning ecosystem. Well, first of all, we want to see learning at the core. We also want to see collaborative inquiry, respectful communication, safety and wellness, caring culture, and ownership and responsibility for learning. I will never forget one of the things, and y'all probably hear this, why did you buy me furniture with wheels? Because I'm having to move it by myself between every class period. Anybody hear that? I don't want that. The kids move it. Guess what? That's the point. But if we don't give them some systems and structures, it doesn't work. We need to have kids have some responsibility for that. A kindergarten kid with systems and structures can move things. We also need to think about, can we design buildings that embrace pro-social learning ecosystems and develop the campus as a safe harbor? Guys, I don't think I can emphasize this enough, that for your kids, this may be their only safe harbor. They eat here, they learn here, they probably have more social interaction here than they do lots of times at home. So how are we going to do that? Well, first of all, is we need to create safety from the inside out. And that matters because it really does define safety and wellness for us. You talked a lot yesterday about physical safety, which, don't get me wrong, is very important. I am working with the architect to build the new Uvalde school where the school shooting took place. And it is extremely important to not make it feel like a fortress, but make it to feel safe, and it has to have those safety things come in. Somebody talked to me yesterday about things that people don't see. Your safety and security is kind of like your sewers. You want them to work, but people can't always see them. It's also about social safety. Is our school a community place? Is it a safe place? Do kids have emotional safety? And I'm going to say this, do kids have intellectual safety? I will never forget a teacher coming to my office, and she was livid about one of her kids, and it was one of my gifted kids. She said, They challenged me. I said, well, okay, what'd they say? Y'all know how that is, how you're going, oh, okay. I know you're mad, you just let me have it right now. What did they say? Well, they said something I said might not be right. I said, okay, what was that? She said, well, I was talking about the fact that, Columbus sailed, the ocean blue in 1492, and I said, okay, that's factual. I mean, she goes, well, he was talking about the reasons Columbus might not go. That's not what I said. So, well, was his reason wrong? You know what she said to me? No. But that kid didn't have intellectual safety, isn't it? How many of you have had to tell your own kids or kids play the game? Play the game. Schools with intellectual safety don't have to play the game. It's okay to question. It's okay to learn. And we also know, we always hear this. I had the best, I can't remember if you're in here today, but you said, construction follows instruction. I love that. But it also follows feeling. Our schools need to be thought, when we put in these new environments, they need to think about that. What is instruction going to look like? I think that's greatly important, but not just that. But what are the feelings that we need to think about and assess as we move forward? And does this space make me feel like I'm valued? We work with lots of districts and work with them kind of on equity, like how this school is. And I will tell you, one of the kids that got a new campus in Georgia that I was at, he walked in and he said, Miss Walker, I'm just so glad you're here. And I said, well, great. Why are you so glad? He goes, because I just wanted to tell you thank you. I don't feel like I go to the ghetto school anymore. You've all got a story about that, don't you? You've got a story about kids that don't feel like they get to go to the good school. And one of the things I want to talk to you about that when we say that is, you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. James Clear wrote a great book called Atomic Habits. If you haven't read it, it is a wonderful book. After surviving the storm, of course, But when you think about that, you do not rise to the level of your goals. What do you have in place to ensure that the people that need the buildings and need those structures, it's not a political choice, and it's actually something that you can see? Do you have some way to go in and say, this is what we're doing because of this objective data? Not because somebody's mom is friends with somebody on the school board. You need to have that. You need to be looking at community spaces and their role in building connections. We have to have restorative spaces. I want you to think about your cafeterias, your media centers, your collaboration spaces in your building. What do they feel like? Do kids want to eat in your cafeteria? You need to think of all those places because our campuses need to have these places for kids. They need to have some places where it feels like they can actually take a breath. I'll give you all these slides so you don't need to worry about writing everything down, but you're more than welcome to take pictures. But I want us to also think about how is our classrooms going to be catalysts for change. When we look at this, this is one of the pieces that I think was just my aha moment. We put in all these new spaces that really look great, right? But do they work well? Well, one of the things when we talk about instruction, about what's going to happen in these spaces, one of the campuses we work with talked about they wanted to see improvement in their classroom conversations, student conversations. Y'all hear any of that? You want kids to talk. Kids won't talk. Well, one of the things we found was being able to change some of their environment, making that a catalyst for change, is we saw a rise from 10% to 48% in student on-topic behavior. Teacher-to-student transactional behavior went down, and those pieces all were able to be shown. Are you measuring the impact of what you're putting in your spaces? If you're not, you need to consider that. We look at dynamic space elements. This is pretty telling, isn't it? And evidence of student ownership. I will tell you the easiest thing in the world. How many of y'all have something in your mission statement too about students being owners of their learning or owners of their future or something similar? We've got to let kids start having some choice and voice. And one of the ways that's easy to do that is some differences in seating, multi-height desks, things like that. And also that kind of becomes a catalyst for helping teachers do different types of learning. There are times that kids need to be in rows. Agree? They need to take tests. They need to work individually. Nothing wrong with that. But if this is what they always have, they are not going to be in a pro-social space. One of the other things we talk about that is spatial layout. Is what you're putting in these campuses, is your design elements, are they flexible? Can you put them in different size groups? How many of you have a pretty good size ELL population? Okay? They don't need to be in groups of 4 immediately. They need to be in groups of 2s and 3s. Why? They won't talk in a group of 4. You need to think about this. If you do a group larger than 4, you know what you have? Something called social loafing. Do you know what social loafing is? It means that you're the one going, hey, I'm going to let the smart girl do all the work in my group, and I'm going to talk to my friend about what's going to happen on the weekend. We have to have these things together. The other thing with spatial layout with trauma is we also have to be able to think. We've always thought about our kids being able to see the whiteboard, right? Can my kids see the whiteboard? I want to have clear line of sight. Those are all important things. But often kids that kind of act up or may act out in trauma, where do the teachers set them traditionally? Front of the classroom? If you are a child who has suffered lots of trauma and you have your back to the door, you are in a constant state of high alert. You've got to think about that. I met with teachers the other day and talked about this, and one of the teachers cried and said, I never understood that. And I said, well, it's not very common knowledge. And she said, no, but I don't think you understand what I'm saying to you. I said, okay. She said, I have a child that I have just been working and making a connection with, and I think it's getting better, and I set him in the spot close to me because I think that'll be better, and his back's to the door, and he acts out every single time. She emailed me last week, said she changed his position to the other side of her, hasn't had a problem. His brain was in high alert, and we were re-traumatizing him without knowing it. When we look at the 4 design elements, learning pods are important. Dynamic place. Can kids move? How many of y'all need to move a little bit? I've got one ADHD kid in here I was on the Jeep tour with. Yes. So one of the things that we know is the dynamic space. Kids need to move. Kids sitting all day long just like us, it doesn't work well. We need to be sure that there's some type of movement, whether that's a gentle sway of something, whether that is something they can just move, or standing. Any of those things help kids with movements. We want to think about our teacher spaces. Now, I'm going to step on toes, so pick up your feet. If your teacher space is more than 1/4 of the classroom, you cannot say that's a student-centered space. I'm going to preface this as really it ought to be about 10%. If I tell teachers that, I will get run out and tarred and feathered, so I don't want to say that. But I'm telling you, if their teacher space is not less than 1/4, it's not a student-centered space. And then I also want you to think about activity zones. Do kids have a place they can just be for a minute? Have you ever had that yourself? Fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, and people are talking to you and your insides are going like this, and you're trying to be like this. You need a place to give them. I always say that, give me a minute. I live with all men. I have to say that a lot. Give me a minute. And when I say that, it means that I need a place to go just to be by myself. One of the other pieces that might impact the environment with that would be wheels, rideable surfaces. How many of you have rideable surfaces? I'm going to tell you my little spiel for that. If you have special ed kids, one of the hardest things for special ed kids some too, and especially perfectionistic kids, is to write on a paper. You'll see kids that have a hole with the eraser. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's because it's the permanency of it. It makes them very anxious to have something written down because it seems very permanent. I have got a group I work with. Their kids write their stuff on their writable surface, take a picture of it. That's their homework. There's a difference in learning how to interact in content and copying. Copying is just copy to copy. So when they write it on their writable surface, it helps. Multi-height, multiple grouping options, and learner preference. How many of you at your office have a standing desk? Have a chair that you like? How many of your classrooms have that? Systems and structures. How many of you hated group work as a kid? Why did we hate group work? You did all the work. If you cared about your grade, you did all the work. Completely agree. I was the girl that cared about her grade. My husband's the one. I said if I dated him in high school, I would have not have married him because I'd have done all the work. Kind of doing that now. Might have rethought that choice. I don't know. But When we talk about systems and structures, without those in place for teachers, they don't know what to do. We put all these great environments in. They're awesome. Would y'all agree that you're awesome? None of you say, I'm going to buy furniture that sucks. Excuse my language. But you don't. Nobody says that. But when the teachers don't understand or have the systems and structures in place, it will not impact instruction like you want it to, or it could. So systems and structures, we do that with roles. And that's one of the things we talk about when we talk with teachers. Do we have roles and systems in place? If I am a kid who needs that pro-social kind of support, if I know what my role is, I can take care of it. And then teacher footprint, again, what's it supposed to be less than? A quarter, really 10%. But don't tell the teachers that. I'm just going to give y'all a hint. I was at a teacher group and I said, it's the step on your toes. If I step on your toes, pick up your feet. And I said, listen, I really think it needs to be 10%. And I mean, my coffee maker doesn't take up 10%. I was like, okay, 25, I'll go with that. These are some things as well. Again, you're free to take pictures of these, but I want you to think about what the purpose of some things is. One, for trauma-informed design, it's to improve movement. One of the things that helps do that is mobility, such as wheels, multi-heights, dynamic choices in seating. The reason for that is this is a true statement. When you sit in dynamic seating, it provides more oxygen to the brain. Remember we talked about executive functioning up there? We want as much oxygen going to the brain as we can. It also increases proximity. When we showed you those numbers about kids talking to each other, I'm going to tell you what I think the single biggest factors were. Kids moved from rows to groups. If I'm not close to you, and I'm going to pick on my friends that sat at the table by themselves, very good-naturedly, but when it came time to talk to somebody, y'all didn't want to get up and move, did you? I wouldn't have either. But when you have proximity to somebody, guess what? It makes it easier to have a what? Conversation. When you look over here, too, at the improving visual interest, I know, how many of y'all are also in charge of the fire code? Raise your hand. Oh, my goodness. Like, I know some of y'all walk in those rooms and go, please get rid of some of that stuff. Please, please, please. It is a good time to do that, just FYI. When you get new furniture, we can talk about that at the booth if you want to come by. But that is a good time to help review. But visual clutter, and clutter really does make kids anxious. So having positive messages and reducing that clutter helps. But also don't just leave the same thing up all year long. Your brain loves novelty. Your brain loves things that are interesting, so that helps kids too. Also bringing the outside in. Bringing the outside in through things like adding a plant, different calming anchors really can help. The other thing is developing an anchored place, a soft seating place with an activity zone. Defronting the classroom. Again, step on your toes, pick up your feet. But smart boards were the coolest thing in the world when I started teaching. Like, I loved them. Like, I was like, I am going to be the best teacher now in the world. But what it has really done is it's tied us to the front of the classroom, hasn't it? Proximity for teachers makes kids feel safe, and it also helps them, we know, with discipline. So defronting the classroom has lots of benefits. And then the last one is scaffolding group sizes to increase safety. So when we think about these things, design is not just what it looks like, it's how it works. This is the Choluteca Bridge in the Honduras. How well built is that bridge? I mean, anybody know about this bridge? It was built by the Army Corps of Engineers. It can withstand anything. It was built in the 1920s, and it is probably one of the best built bridges in the world. But guess what? That's the same bridge. Still standing, but what it was built for was to connect two areas of the community. But a hurricane came and it changed the flow of the river. COVID changed the flow of our river, didn't it? Things look different. We have really kind of more money in education than we've had forever, but there's very dependent on ways it can be spent. How many of you keep hearing, you don't need to do that, we need to give teachers raises? Anybody hear that in here? I don't know. We can't do that out of certain pots of money. But it's very frustrating when we feel like the bridge has moved kind of from under us. I want you to think a little bit about some deliberate actions to consider. And one is seeking resources and training to help better understand these components and really how it can impact your district. Walk campus to identify some of those pro-social components or currently exist areas or gaps. How many of y'all work with curriculum and instruction in here on some level? If you don't, make a friend be a friend. What are they trying to do? Are they trying to do productive student conversations? Are they trying to increase rigor? What are they trying to do? And do our facilities and does our environment match up to that? Assess your current learning environments and determine 2 or 3 actions that you really want to make. Guys, I'm going to tell you right now, you can't do everything. Some of you, Sandra, I'm going to pick on you. Sandra listed her job description, and I was tired just hearing the end of it. None of it is, you never have one job. And even if you have people underneath you to help with some of those jobs, it still makes it really difficult to do. The other thing is to share this information with your stakeholders to build on current strengths and strategize to address existing gaps. And I want to say this to you about trauma-informed design. People don't want to talk about trauma. People don't want to talk about broken buildings. People don't want to talk about bad water. People don't want to talk about bad air. They don't want to talk about negative things. How many of you kind of feel that way? I'm going to soften the blow on this. But what do you talk about at the beginning, a crisis of confidence? We're going to have to be able to be transparent to some level, and there's nothing wrong with that. But be sure you have data to prove it. Everybody is looking for somebody to blame because they're upset and angry. When we wrote Surviving the Storm and we went through districts across the nation, the common theme was we have all these disruptions in our school and we don't know what school's going to look like anymore. When we talk about those things and we look at them, I want to tell you just a little bit and I want to think about what you think about this. ProSocial is a shovel. If we all dig together and we all use our shovel, guess what happens? It goes pretty quick. We all work together. Nobody gets tired. If you take tired, you get a break. But we often in education use a bulldozer. A bulldozer is pretty much the antisocial world. You're just going to come in, move out of our way. This is what it's going to be like. If you will become transparent, it becomes more pro-social, and that filters down into your campuses. So how do you know if you've arrived with ProSocial Learning Ecosystem? Well, one, are you creating a warm and welcoming environment? Are you fostering a sense of physical and social order? Look at your outside spaces. When you walk your campuses and you do a building assessment, I want you to look at the hidden spots, the bushes, places where kids could have an incident that you might not be aware of. Have somebody from your community. If you have a law enforcement friend, they are the best people to come do that for you. They know all those hiding places, and they want to look at that. Are you creating a sense of ownership by students? Kids can't own everything, but if we don't let them start having some semblance of some responsibility, guess what? They're not going to just automatically take it. Are you creating sending positive messages to your students? Maximizing a sense of community? Minimizing opportunities for out-of-site activities? Managing access to all school areas. How many of you have places in your schools that are never used? But Bill, I love it. I was in a district and I finally said, what is this room? They're like, what do you mean? I said, well, this room here, like I have, the master key won't even open it. Like, what is this room? You know what it was? It was encyclopedias from the 1950s. That is no lie. We didn't know where it was. Everybody's like, oh, I don't know. And everybody I asked, I don't know. So finally we got a locksmith to come in. We opened it up. We had a whole new instruction space in there when we looked at it. Are we hearing more student discourse and providing systems and structures that help students build authentic, future-ready skills? What you do matters. A lot of what you do that matters a lot isn't seen very well. But what you put into these schools and how you build these schools is. Be transparent, be thoughtful and intentional, find partners that you trust and that trust you and that you mesh with. Because one of the things that we really think happens lots of times in education is in our mind we have one idea, but our school districts might have another one. Be sure you're aligned. That's going to be another key piece, and you can align with the curriculum instruction. If you want to know more about the trauma-informed design, the trauma course, or receive a complimentary book, actually, I'm not going to make you go by our booth, but I would love to have your information. If you don't mind sharing it, you can grab a book from our table if you didn't have one. Thank you guys so much for today.